to the place where the tent had been at the beginning between Bethel and Ai, to the place where he had made an altar at the first. And there Abram called upon the name of the Lord. And Lot, who went with Abram, also had flocks and herds and tents, so that the land could not support both of them dwelling together, for their possessions were so great that they could not dwell together. And there was strife between the herdsmen of Abram's livestock and the herdsmen of Lot's livestock. At that time the Canaanites and the Perizzites were dwelling in the land. Then Abram said to Lot, "Let there be no strife between you and me, and between your herdsmen and my herdsmen, for we are all kinsmen. Is not the whole land before you? Separate yourself from me. If you take the left hand, then I will go to the right, or if you take the right hand, then I will go to the left."
And Lot lifted up his eyes and saw that the Jordan Valley was well watered everywhere, like the garden of the Lord, like the land of Egypt, in the direction of Zoar. This was before the Lord destroyed Sodom and Gomorrah. So Lot chose for himself all the Jordan Valley, and Lot journeyed east. Thus they separated from each other. Abram settled in the land of Canaan, while Lot settled among the cities of the valley, and moved his tent as far as Sodom. Now the men of Sodom were wicked, great sinners against the Lord. And the Lord said to Abram, after Lot had separated from him, "Lift up your eyes and look from the place you are, northward and southward and eastward and westward. For all the land that you see I will give to you and to your offspring forever. I will make your offspring as the dust of the earth, so that if one can count the dust of the earth, your offspring also can be counted. Also walk through the length and the breadth of the land, for I will give it to you." So Abram moved his tent and came and settled by the oaks of Mamre, which are at Hebron. And there he built an altar to the Lord.
Abram acquires great wealth when he's down in Egypt. He does that through some duplicitous means, but he also God showers great wealth upon him, and he goes out from Egypt. Abram wants to get back to where he can worship the Lord. He wants to get back to Bethel. This is the place where back in chapter 12 that he had made an altar, and so he's wanting to get back to the place that God had promised him that he would be given that as his inheritance. So that's the context for kind of what's going on. He's wanting to make his way back up to the promised land. And yet he has all of these riches that are dumped on him. And we've got to think about this idea of the riches and what God does with riches, and how riches, what are kind of some of the things about riches that we need to be aware of. First off, when we think about what happens between Abram and Lot, let's identify the reason that they split. The reason that they split is because of their wealth, and because of the livestock, and because there's so much that they each have that they have to split. So we say that, in one very direct sense, this is a result of the riches that they have. Abram went with his family up to Haran, and he went with Lot down into Canaan. So this is Abram's desire. He wants to be familial. He wants to keep his family with him together. And the heart of Abram is to be familial, to keep close contact. That is something that is very important to Abram. But on the flip side, he also wants to worship God, and he also wants to do what is right. But it's the riches that are the immediate cause of the strife that happens between the herdsmen of Lot and the herdsmen of Abram. And that obviously escalates up to the Abram versus Lot. In fact, Abram identifies that and says, in verse 8, let there be no strife between you and me, indicating that that is something that he felt personally because of the people and livestock that were underneath him that were in conflict. Okay, as we isolate on thinking about the riches and the wealth and the benefit of the riches, like Tevye, we want to say, God cursed me with this blessing. But some of the things that attend being rich are that you have to. It takes time, it takes energy, and in this case, it takes some sort of managing of conflict because the two of the riches on the one hand and God's blessing in those riches, and not holding those riches so tightly that we can't that we can't be a blessing to somebody else, or that we can't resolve differences here. And as an example, Calvin uses Augustine. He points back to Augustine and says, in reference back to Luke 16, that it was the poor man Lazarus who was received into the bosom of the rich man Abraham. There we have an example of two people in heaven, one rich, one poor. It isn't like that the rich man can't make it into heaven. We know that it's tougher for a camel to go through the eye of a needle than for a rich man to enter heaven. But if that blessing comes, if the richness comes from the Lord, then He also gives the wherewithal to be able to deal with that. We have a great example here in Abraham and in Abram of how to deal with conflict. What does Abram say to Lot, in essence?
Says, do whatever you want.
Do what you want, and I'll go the other way. So let's focus on that for just a minute. Who is Lot? He's Abram's nephew. Okay, there's some sort of, in a familial sense, there's some sort of, and as we said, Abram brings Lot with him, and Lot is just following along. There would be some sort of, senior parent-child
it was part of Abram taking the role of the servant leader and saying, well, we know we need to do this. But knowing that he also needed to work for Lot's good in a situation where it wouldn't be good for Lot to leave in a lot of ways.
Exactly. Later on, it's going to be, it would have been helpful for circumstances that are going to happen in Lot's life, that he possibly would not have been captured if they had been together. So, right. Okay. But we're going to see as we focus on. Go ahead, Peter.
Is it implied that the land they're on is not able to support each other independently? Because Abram also moves.
Correct.
They both move away.
Yeah. Well, the Lord gives. He's given this land back in chapter 12 too, and he reiterates that. So, but I don't know that how much, and how far and so forth. But they've separated, and they've gone far enough away that that's what it says. That's what the text says. That's right.
What about one of them independently?
What?
What if it was just one of them living in there?
I think that might be part of the making peace. Like instead of just sending him away, they're sort of both compromising and both doing.
That's what I was wondering about.
Draw a line in the sand. All right, cool. You have that side. I'll take this side.
Yeah.
Or really lots of, okay, I'll take this side. All right, cool. I'll take the other side.
It wasn't so much
Like,
you get out of here and let's split.
yeah.
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 And that maybe Lot wouldn't have to travel so far if Abram also traveled,
Yeah.
Okay, what's going to happen with Lot? Let's look at a minute at Genesis 14:12.
They also took Lot, the son of Abram, his brother, who was dwelling in Sodom, and his possessions, and went their way.
Okay, here in chapter 13, where is Lot dwelling? Where does he end up being?
in Sodom.
Yeah, he went as far as Sodom, verse 12. And then we have the example of him being in Sodom, and then Genesis 19:1.
The two angels came to Sodom in the evening, and Lot was sitting in the gate of Sodom.
Okay, so that's all I need. Thank you. Sorry, Krista.
I was like, wait, I thought you were the first one.
He's sitting in the gate of Sodom, which means he's one of the elders, which means he's one of the authorities in the city. Talk about integration or some pluralism here or something. But so that we don't get too far astray of who Lot is, let's remember who he is. 2 Peter 2:7.
Oh, sorry. I think I was showing something. Second Peter.
Yeah, it's not a complete sentence, but give me that one.
I went to 1 Peter 2. Second. What was the chapter and verse again? Sorry.
2 Peter 2:7.
3:7. And if he rescued Lot, a righteous man, he was distressed by the filthy lives of lawless men.
Okay, that's all I need. Righteous Lot, that's the key phrase.
Okay.
So, we need to remember who this guy is. He's part of the covenant community. He's with Abram. Yes, his focus is maybe not where it should be, and yet God is the one who chooses, and he allows us to go through the circumstances in the life that we have. And so that will be to train Lot. There's going to be some bad stuff that happens in Lot, but we keep in mind the kind of the assessment of Scripture. So the example from Abram is that we learn from Abram that even though we may be in a position of authority, even though we may be the one who should be deferred to, we give that up And then that ends up being, peace, not peace at all costs, but peace certainly in the area where we can give up that right. Okay. Let us learn then by this example that, here's the other one. What guided Lot, his eyes? What did he want? He wanted good things. He wanted temporal things. And Calvin says it's not in, we don't trust our eyes. We don't trust our what we see. We look with the eyes of faith, Hebrews 11:1. So that's been one of the central themes for us, that we live by faith. So Hebrews 11:1 says,
Now faith is being sure of what we hope for and certain of what we not see.
and that's back to Lisa's point that Abram is willing to look out on a place and see that there's, when life gives you lemons, you make lemonade, and there's opportunity there as well as over there. By the way, there's evil people in the land, right? The text reminds us of that. And so that is something that Lot knew when he chose the place where he was going. So it's not like the choice was a clear choice between, well, this is really well watered. He focused on the well watered. He didn't focus on the enemies of God that were in the land that they're going to at some point have to do something about.
Is there any indication at all that God has had a conversation with God?
Not that I know of, but
And the only reason I point that out is because before we sort of elevate Abram over Lot in his decision making, we should remember that God is the one who has directed Abram and repeatedly reminded him that this land is going to be yours. I don't know of any such case where he said that to Lot.
right.
But
That's
even
true.
after Lot leaves, the next thing he says to him is, look at everything you can see. Everything you can see is going to be yours. Even after Lot said, I want that spot over there.
Mhm.
God says, it's going to be yours.
I guess what I'm saying is that the faith aspect was a gift of God to Abram as well.
Mhm.
God acted, made the first step forward and guided him along the way. And Lot does not. It doesn't appear anywhere in the text that Lot had the same interaction opportunity, to make that relationship and that covenant. It's not made with Lot, it's made with Abram. So,
And yet Lot is included in it because God always goes after Lot, and Abram always goes after Lot to keep him, to preserve him.
Yeah.
So there is a sense of Lot being in the covenant, but maybe under Abram.
Yeah.
Rather than,
And choices have consequences.
yes.
So is Lot supposed to just say no, or, I'll take the desert side instead of the well-watered side? Or
He
is
should-
Lot
he should
in a hard,
defer-
a rock and a hard place?
What if, Ben, Lot had, when he sensed the conflict, what if he had gone to Abram? Is there another solution?
that's
At
what
the
I'm saying,
point
there's gotta be
that it comes up to Abram, Abram sees no other solution,
Sure.
and so is it possible when Lot comes in a position of submission that there's, possibilities there?
I mean, I guess.
Hey,
Lot
the
could say,
herdsmen
"Here,
of Lot,
you just have all my stuff."
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah.
I just see a lot kind of like cut. Like, what does he do? I mean, he sees the well-watered place. I'll take that, I guess. Or they could redraw the line. Well, maybe you have half of it. I don't know.
Or he can defer.
Yeah, or just
He can put that right back on Abram, and he said,
true.
"You're right. You called me out. Sorry.
Yeah.
I'm focusing too much on the temporal here."
Yeah, that makes more sense. Okay.
Yeah, there's a covenant structure that's working itself out horizontally. Abraham's the only one who has the promise. And as long as Lot sojourns in the covenant structure of Abraham, Lot gets Abraham's promise. So today, God is sovereignly, Lot is personally excommunicating himself from the extended favor of God by separating himself from his covenant head, Abraham.
Mhm.
And so the fallout for Lot is just one mess after another. Yes, he is righteous, Lot, and yes, Abraham loves him and yet pursues him like the lost sheep, and yet extends favor to him perpetually. But Lot's decision results in a lifetime of mess and his offspring will never inherit the land. The Moabites and the Ammonites end up becoming arch enemies of the people of God instead of part of the people of God. And so this meta-narrative of God separating Abraham off to his side, this is Lot's option. You know, if you look at it and you go, reading the hand of God, what is Lot's best choice? To give up having his own stuff.
Yeah.
To say, I would rather live in the tent of Abraham than own anything. I would rather be dirt poor and have the promise of God than any wealth for myself.
Yeah, there's a sense that he's sort of a prodigal in the end. He escapes through the fire with just his life.
Yeah.
Literally.
Yeah.
I mean, even his wife doesn't make it.
He doesn't love lineage of Jesus stuff as a group.
Correct. The Moabitess line has some redemptive feature in that Ruth comes back.
And it's interesting to contrast him with Ruth, who refuses to leave.
Yes.
I was thinking of that.
Ruth and Rahab both were the two I thought of in contrast. Go back to your own people, go your own way. Now,
There's nothing for you if you stay here. That's okay.
I'm okay with it.
Yeah, so there is the covenant and the emphasis on the covenant and the renewing here of the covenant and God's work in the history of redemption. There's also choices that people make as a result of that. Would you argue against that, Pete?
No, I think it's better put in the context of the fact that Lot chose to divorce himself from that. But it's not that he sort of had an equal share of the covenant as transmitted. He could be a part of it or not a part of it. So he certainly chose the way. I think that we should be careful of reading too much of Abram's good decision making back into the text.
And Calvin brings up the fact, and I really like the fact that, do we get the God speaking to us? Of course we get the God speaking to us. We say in a Reformed play, God speaks to us in his word. That's where Calvin goes back and said, we have the revelation of God. We have the revelation of God in his word. We have the revelation of God in Jesus Christ. We have the revelation of the covenant in Christ and the fulfillment of that in Christ. And so then there is more benefit, there is more responsibility for the people of God having been given those extra benefits and blessings. Certainly Abraham is more responsible and more culpable, and yet he's also responding better, and God is blessing him. In spite of, having lied in Egypt. So.
Well, I think part of the thing that we can all pray to is that we elevate the
decision-making
benefits of our good choices in life.
Yes.
Oh, your life is so horrible because you made bad choices. Well, that may very well be, but that might be a consequence, like a symptom of the problem, which is you're not in the covenant. So all of Lot's decision. I just, go back to our Christian cultural heritage. There's a lot of times where Abram is elevated because he chose this, or it's portrayed as this, as more so than God chose Abram, and God facilitated the promise on Abram's behalf, despite all of his human flaws, instead of the other way around. He made great choices, and God blessed him.
We have to, and you keep on making that point, that we need to hold both in tension.
Yeah, it's God's sovereignty and human responsibility displayed in a very early form of God's revelation to the covenant head of all the people that he's going to call for himself.
True.
The thing that keeps running through my head is Jesus' words where he says, wide is the way that leads to destruction, and narrow is the way that leads to the Lord. Abraham didn't make a good choice here. He made a choice that didn't look good at all.
Yeah.
And Lot's life, being punctuated by disaster, in between the disasters, was actually probably the cushier life, if you read between the lines. And so I guess, I think that's supporting really what Pete says, that in one sense that Abraham was chosen, Abraham was confident in God's election. But he wasn't, making sensible choices. He was making the choices that God wanted him to and following God's lead and forsaking even prosperity. He was forsaking obvious prosperity and God prospered him anyway, because that's what God does. But Lot, it shouldn't surprise us that Lot ended up with crappy neighbors, because which direction did Lot go? Towards the wealthy. He was looking at the wealthy sector, whether it was the green grass or eventually ends up in the city. In a sense, that's not surprising. Huh?
You went east. You just can't go east. East is bad. Every time in Genesis, somebody goes east that ends up in trouble.
Well, God is ordering.
Said the New Yorker who landed in Oklahoma.
Yeah.
Obviously, it's very translated.
Let's go to Tulsa.
Oh, wait.
Go west, young man. John
That might be reading Manifest Destiny back into Genesis.
Yeah,
Maybe.
let's not do that.
So, and
Very bad.
one verse previous, right, to chapter 13, Abraham's making terrible choices, right?
And he's going to make terrible choices later on.
Yeah.
He's got some more of those.
So,
It gets to continue.
So the lesson for the saint is that God's plan prevails, and yet we make choices and we suffer the consequences or receive the blessings sometimes based mainly on those mistakes or choices. So, Ben.
A lot of needed, this is Abraham, was going to be Abraham's land, right? Did he not know this?
You would think that he would know that.
Because
That's
it's why-
not something that he would necessarily keep to himself, because this would be part of the worship of
Right.
God, and Abram, being who he is, a man of worship, would certainly want to pass that on to his offspring, to whom the promise will be
Right.
given. Lot being part of the family.
So if Lot knew that, raised him, I just look at it as then like it's idolatry essentially. He wants the goods and riches, and he chooses that over God. Over
I was
God.
going to say the choice is for God, not for.
And full well knowing that he chooses idolatry. So, God.
I think Pete's comment about the prodigal son is very similar to this, because Lot was only descendant or relative of Abram at this point. Later on when he's lamenting his lack of offspring and says all of this stuff is going to go to this random guy that we don't know anything about. It would logically go to Lot when he died. But Lot chooses to leave instead. He theoretically could, he knew the promise too. He knew that there would be offspring maybe from Abraham, but he didn't know that he would not inherit anything. He lost his inheritance.
Another thing I think is probably interesting as from a textual standpoint is to look at all the times where it says, and they're able to call upon the name of the Lord. That verse, and there he built an altar to the Lord. And then in between those, read the text in the concept of, okay, he's first called upon the name of the Lord, and then this situation happened, or then this happened. But, just like David did the same thing, as far as the writer is concerned, those to me are bookmarks, significant bookmarks to say, Abram is walking with God, this happened, and God is influencing it because he's calling upon his name. If that makes sense.
Yeah.
I think the writer is putting those things in there very purposely to sort of bracket the circumstances and the decisions that are made.
Right. Any other points? Next week, Pete is going to be finishing up his series on worship, and go from there. So there's no other comments.